Hello, my name is Lorraine Stacker and I am retired now, but I was Council's historian and research librarian in the library. In the course of that work, I wrote the history of Penrith for the Council, called Penrith, the Makings of a City, and several other local histories on the local area. So we're just going to go through and talk about the history of the Council in celebration of the 150th anniversary of the of local government in our local area. So first of all, I want to just talk about this beautiful photograph that was taken in 1994 when we moved into our wonderful, beautiful, iconic, unusual civic centre. So this photo was taken in May 1994, and it's a great celebration of the city at that time. And we have been kind of in celebration of that ever since. So the staff who are still working in this building at that now and at that time still feel like it's a new building. So what we're going to do is go back in time and kind of almost go back to the beginning of around the time of early settlement, white settlement in our Penrith Council area. This is an iconic photograph that has not been in our history for a very long time. It was discovered in Germany because it was photographed by a German photographer in the 1850s. Went back to Germany and has been there for a very long time until the Powerhouse Museum discovered it amongst all the other photographs this German photographer took. This beautiful photograph shows the bridge. Actually, it's the second bridge across the Nepean River. It's not Victoria Bridge, it's before then, it's in the early 1850s. So this bridge was built by Toby Ryan, who was a local businessman, the grandson of a convict who lived in the local area. And so, along with some other businessmen, they built this bridge because they knew, with the gold rushes happening in the early 1850s, that people needed to get across the river. Before then, it was a punt. And so it was just showing that the Penrith area was growing. It wasn't a council then, in the 1850s. It was a small community. Only a few hundred people actually lived in the village of Penrith. And so they were looking at how they would cross that river and get people over the mountains and to the goldfields. So this bridge actually shows the end bits of the first bridge that was built, the middle section and the top bit of the second bridge that was built. Sadly, the whole thing was washed away in a flood. But you know what is there now? It's our walking bridge, Yendahay. That's what it is there in exactly the same spot. So when you stand on that bridge today, you can imagine this. And when they built that bridge only a few years ago, they found all the footings for this original bridge in the river. So it's a fantastic part of our history. And so from this, people started to think about a local government for their area. Before then, they had district councils, which were too large. They couldn't force people to pay any kind of rates to help financially improve the local area. And so, but something like this was the sort of thing that really started pushing the idea that people wanted to look after their own local affairs. In the 1860s, along comes the railway, and the railway was a huge impetus for the Penrith area to really start looking at, well, you know, we need to be governed locally. There's these big projects happening. The railway came in 1863 and it stopped at Penrith. It couldn't get over the river. And so the state government, or the colonial government at that time, thought, well, they had to build a railway bridge. And so that would take a long time. So the railway finished in Penrith. And so all through the 1860s, there was this movement of incorporation as a municipality. So what happened? The first applications for that incorporation was rejected, and so people in the outer lying areas were saying, "Well, you know, what's the benefit to us having a council that's really only going to benefit the village of Penrith, which by then had about 2,000 or 3,000 people living there?" But they had this huge railway stopping there, they had a terminus there, they had lots of men come and work at the railway. They were cleaning the engines, they were putting water in, they were putting coal into the steam trains, and those trains were going backwards and forwards to Sydney. But everyone knew that at some point that a railway bridge would be built and then the railway line would extend across the Blue Mountains. So the coming of the railway was a huge impetus for the local area. Okay, so there was lots of opposition to the incorporation of a municipality, but by the late 1860s, the colonial government had made some changes to the Municipality Act. And even though the petition that was put forward again in the late 1860s, even though there was more opposition, there were more people who signed that petition against incorporation, the colonial government made the decision that Penrith would become a municipality. And so that occurred in May 1871. So then we get something like this beautiful little thing, discovered in amongst all the council's treasures, and it's the seal belonging to something that was created by the early council, which is the seal of the council, signed by the first mayor. So this is a beautiful little treasure that we have in the local studies room in the council, in the library. And so it's an indication of the pride and success of that early council. When the incorporation occurred, it had to be created out of nothing. So aldermen had to be elected, and also rates had to be collected. But before rates are collected, people have to know how much they had to pay. And so auditors had to go around to every property in the designated municipality of Penrith and work out what the rate would be. And so that rate book, an assessment book, was written up by hand by the one and only council employee, and that was John Price. He was our local undertaker, he was the local real estate agent, he was the local auditor, and then he becomes, and also he was the local funeral director and stonemason and pretty much everything else. So he becomes the first employee. So this is John Price's handwriting. The name of the person who's living on that property, the street where it is. So you've got the street, the occupier, the leasee, the owner, and what is on that land. And then it's assessed for rates. Then the rate is assessed here. So what happened back then, the owner, we'll love this, the owner in this very first page is Jane Woodruff. The owner never paid rates. It's the occupier who pays the rates. And that happened all the way up to around 1900. The owners never paid the rates unless you were living on your property. So this very first book shows Jane Woodruff because Penrith is settled on the Woodruff estate, 1,000 acres. It goes from Woodruff Street all the way down to the river, from Jemison Road all the way up to the turn where Castlereagh Road in the big roundabout, where the rowers are at the roundabout on Castlereagh Road. And so all of these occupiers and leasees of that land really tell us a story of the people who lived here. And so we can build up a picture. And so when I wrote the history of Penrith, I could build up a story about who was living here, how long they were living, what kind of properties they were living on, whether the house was a slab house, whether it was made of brick, whether it was a shop. You know, all of those details are all here in this rate book. And so Penrith Council and the library hold every single book from 1871 of this, what we call an assessment book, and the rate book that goes with it. So it's the most wonderful archive of our history. Penrith Council started getting money to spend. And they had one employee, of course, for a very long time. And but over the years, the odd employees, you know, they started to get a few more. And then, but most of the work was done by day labourers. So John Price would start to sort of work out how much money they had. And then the aldermen would split themselves up into, they had a works committee, they had a finance committee, and all of those different committees then decided what work had to be done around the local area. So they took over the road trusts, and so they started working on, you know, we all know about the whole, the saying about what councils are all about, with the roads, rates and rubbish, and that's kind of what it was. It was all about fixing the roads and maintaining the roads. It was making sure everyone got rid of their rubbish and kept the place tidy and healthy. And then for the council to do that, they needed people to pay those rates. And so by the early 1880s, they felt like they were confident enough to build themselves a council chambers. So the council chambers just had a couple of rooms out the back, but one big meeting room in the middle. And so this is a photo taken in the 1920s of the council chambers. So up the top, it says who the mayor was. So it was Alfred Collis, who just happened to run the Nepean Times newspaper. And so the library is also fortunate to have all of the copies of the Nepean Times newspaper from the Nepean Times office. So Alfred Collis established that newspaper, and he was the mayor at the time when they built the council chambers. So what the other thing that we have relating to the council chambers, we've actually got the specifications for the building. This blows me away. And you know, all the details about how this building was to be constructed, all the details. So the builder was Thomas Clissold, and he was a well-known local man and builder. Later on in its life, the council rented it out to the school across the road. And so the school students, particularly the girls at the school across the road, they would go in there and have their classes, because this building is next to, it was next to the old library. By the late 1880s, the council was interested in improving the local area, and they were concerned about clean water, and they were concerned about how people lit their homes at night, and with the health and safety of local people. So in the 1880s, they looked at this new form of lighting called electricity. And so it was a very, very bold move on their part. They went around the state and they had a look at electric lighting. Now, it was a bit of a struggle between, do you go electric or do you go gas at that time? And so Penrith Council thought, no, electricity was the way to go. They were the third local government area to install electricity in New South Wales. So it's a very, very significant thing on their part. And so this building here is the electric station that was in Belmore Street in Penrith, near the railway station. And we're lucky that we've got this wonderful photo inside the building. So, but it was a huge financial drain for the council. And did they know or didn't they know that a terrible economic depression was about to hit the whole country, all of the colonies at that time? They made a huge investment, and even though there were financial concerns, they ploughed ahead with it anyway. And it was an extremely proud moment when this building was opened in the 1890s, in 1890. This is the trowel that was used to lay the foundation stone for this building on the 30th of April 1890. And it was laid by the Lady Mayoress at the time, Mrs. Smith, and she was given the trowel. She turned the sod or whatever she did with it, and then the family kept it, even though it was kind of part of Penrith Council's archive. But luckily for us, the family only a few years ago donated it back to the council and to the library. So we're very fortunate to have it, and it's a wonderful thing that you can feel and touch and know that it was really, absolutely part of our history. Now, at the same time that this was done, that electric power was turned on at Penrith, they also decided to run a water supply from the river through pipes all the way up the main street. So they had to dig up the entire high street and lay the pipes, and then out to as many homes as they could that could afford it. And so again, these two huge activities that the council decided was important for the health and safety of the local community was the most massive drain on a financial drain on the council. So along with the economic depression, Penrith Council was in dire straits, couldn't pay the loans off, couldn't pay anything off, and then went to the colonial government and saying, we're broke, what do we do? So the colonial government stepped in, looked after the loans, took care of that, and also with some local people helping Penrith Council out, they struggled on. They were very fortunate in the early 1900s to have a wonderful new town clerk employed, and his name was Ernie Orth. He was only in his 20s, and through much opposition from some of the councillors, he was employed, and he dragged Penrith Council out of that financial mire, and it took him about 20 years to do it, but he achieved it. So then we move into the 1930s, and Penrith Council is just starting to sort of come out and be a bit more financially well off. This is an image of the High Street, taken in the early 1900s, I guess. We can see the landscape changing by these electricity poles here. Still horse and cart everywhere. Of course, there's no motor cars or anything like that. Dirt road still, so whenever it rained, it became a bit of a bog. But by the 1930s, this road is sealed. And so it was a big construction on the part of the state government to seal this main road, because really High Street is the Great Western Highway, And so back then there was no, side streets or anything like that. To take you around High Street, you just went straight down the main street. And so Penrith is very fortunate to have retained all the facades that are still there today. Penrith was able to, with the help of the federal government and state government during the 1930s with the economic depression, they were financially supported by those two governments to help the local community. And so they were able to provide work for a lot of unemployed men and women in the local area. But also the munitions factory was constructed at St Mary's, which also gave employment to a lot of local people, and in particular women, who, especially during the Second World War, it was the women who went to work at the munitions factory. Getting close to the end of the war, the state government had really been thinking about local government and how it was being run throughout the state, and they believed that they had too many council areas. And so from maybe the 1930s, they started looking at ways to reduce the number of councils, local government areas in the state. And so they started promoting the idea that Castlereagh Council, St Mary's Council and the Nepean Shire should amalgamate with Penrith to become Penrith Municipal Council, a big Penrith Municipal Council. And it's the local government area that we know of today, the way our city and its boundaries are set up today. That had caused a huge amount of angst by the people and the councillors who worked in those other council areas. And so there was nothing but discussions particularly from the late 1930s and all through the war time period, and particularly straight after that, when the war finished, about the amalgamation, how these councils would amalgamate, who they would amalgamate with. And so Castlereagh and Nepean Shire were kind of okay because they knew that they were struggling, and they knew it was hard to continue the way they were. And everyone did look to Penrith. It was the bigger town, and so that was the place. That's where the courthouse was. That's where the larger administrative and commercial areas were. But St Mary's Council had a different idea. They were much more based on industry. They had the munitions factory there, and so they were supported by the federal government to create a huge city, the city of St Mary's. But what the federal government wants and what the state government wants are two different things, and often they don't talk to each other. And so who won? Well, of course the state government won. And so they created the Municipality of Penrith, and everyone had to come in line with that. There was great discussions about where council chambers would be established, but the state government said, no, it's staying where it is in Penrith. There was also discussion about the name. Oh, should we call it Nepean? Should we call it some other name? Or they started coming up with all these different names about how they would call this new municipality. The state government stepped in and said, no, you're calling it Penrith, and that's it. And so, a lot of us look at our history and say, oh, we made this decision or that decision. Often it is the state government or the colonial government that had been making these decisions all along. And so we need to be mindful of that, and the way the bigger picture decisions are made by state governments and how they impact on local government areas. And so that is what happened to the Penrith area. And so now today we're celebrating Penrith as a city, but that includes Castlereagh and Emu Plains and Mulgoa and St Mary's and North St Mary's and Collerton and Erskine Park and St Clair. All of those areas are part of Penrith City. But as part of the changes that were happening in the 1940s, a wonderful person by the name of Oswald Ziegler contacted council and said, hey, I've got a great promotional idea. After the war, we need to promote and tell everybody about how wonderful this place is, and we would like to promote and tell people about Penrith. Would you like to spend some money and buy some books? I've got an idea. And so this little booklet came out. It's just a wonderful story. The words were written with the help of a local historian. The photographs were taken by Max Dupain, and they were very artistically put together. I don't think Max Dupain wasn't happy by the way they were sort of, shaped and everything. But anyway, so this little booklet came out, and you know what? We still have them, which is fantastic. And it really is tells the story of our history from the late 1940s and 1950s. The other thing that happened when the amalgamation occurred was the fact that a lot of businesses contacted councils that had been amalgamated, and they said, well, you need a logo and you need robes, town clerk robes, and you need all sorts of things. And so Penrith Council went out and spent some money, and so this is their crest that they created. A lot of people think that it was created way back when we became a municipality in 1871, but that's not the case. It was in the 1950s. And so they recognised the Aboriginal original owners, but they also recognised the white settlement and the Dungaree farmer, and they looked at the industries that were in the local area. And so this seal is still, and crest is still used today on official occasions. The other thing that happened, they said town clerk needed new robes, so he got new robes, and he got a wig to wear on all the ceremonial occasions. And so you'll see in a lot of the photographs that the library hold of all the major celebrations, the town clerk is dressed in his robes, which are on display in the library and are always in the library's research room. But this is his wig as well. And so it sits in this gorgeous box. And so it came all the way from London, of course. Penrith Council in the 1950s realised that it was growing rapidly. New immigrants were coming, working in the local area, setting up business, and Penrith Council started thinking about, well, what does it mean to be a city? And what do we have to do to become a city? And so they thought, well, we better find out. And so they wrote a letter, and they got a response. And here's the response, 13th of November 1959, to say, yes, we acknowledge. Pleased to inform you that His Excellency the Governor and Executive Council have approved of the issue of a proclamation giving effect to the application by Penrith Municipal Council for the declaration of the municipality as a city under the provisions of the Local Government Act 1919. And so here's the nice little letter that's come in from Parliament. And often we get asked in the library, where's our evidence? Where's our big proclamation, or where's the big piece of paper or the seal or something to prove that we're a city? And I say, well, this letter, and it's in the Government Gazette. That's it. Oh, all of a sudden you're a city. And so at the same time, they thought, well, if we're going to become a city, then we need to have a new civic centre. And so they very proudly built their civic centre with not a huge budget, I must say, but built on the corner here of Station Street and Henry Street. Henry Street didn't actually extend any further than that. And also you can see in this photograph, it's still a dirt road. At the end of 1959, moving from the old council chambers down Henry Street into the new civic centre on the corner of Henry Street and Station Street. And they had some huge celebrations. This is a photograph, an aerial photograph of Emu Plains, taken in the 1950s. And you can see, look at this, these beautiful orchards. The main road, there is Melrose Hall, built in the 1930s. And so, here's the Great Western Highway here, and turning all the way up, going all the way up, and it follows all the way up the mountains. And so this area here, this square, is Emu Park, and that is exactly how it is today. It's a park for everyone in that Emu Plains community to enjoy. And boy, do they enjoy it. It's just packed full of people all the time. This square, which is, as I said, Emu Park, is exactly the same as what was on the convict farm. The contours of Emu Plains and all of these big squares relate to all the paddocks that were on the convict farm that was built in established in the 1820s. And so Emu Plains, filled with orchards, then become filled with houses. And so it's a huge housing estate now. It's not only Emu Plains, there's Emu Heights and Leonay that are part of that. So in 1963, of course, Emu Plains then moves across to Penrith Council. It's where I live. And so, but we always feel like we're just a little bit different on the other side of the river. The other nice thing, if you pay your house insurance, we're in the country, by the way, over the river. And but it's just, it is nice that Emu Plains, who always thought they were part of Penrith anyway, could never really come to terms with the idea that they're part of Blue Mountains Council because they were so far away from everything, so far away from the seat of government, which was at Katoomba, and so they never ever felt like they were part of the Blue Mountains. They were always part of Penrith, right back from the first settlement, and when it became a convict farm, they were always connected to Penrith. Convicts, when they were in trouble, they went to Penrith Courthouse. The convicts, when they were assigned, they all went around the Nepean area and were assigned. The convicts traded with local people, they swam across the river, and then they swam back to the convict farm. So life must have been reasonably good at Emu Plains. Now, this photograph was taken in the late 1960s, early 70s. And it's one of those ones that's it's like a 180 photograph, taken from the tower that's in the railway station, and it looks across to what we now know as Jane Street, but Jane Street isn't quite there. Car park is here for the railway station. The Red Cow is here. And the Borwick House is being constructed, and there was this huge empty space which is now filled up by Penrith Plaza. Over here is the construction of the very first Penrith Square, they called it. And so this is a big, big change for Penrith. And way over here in this little corner is where the Civic Centre is today. But this one here has just grown and grown and grown. It's like a city in there. So it takes up all this space here, and now it takes up all this space here. And so it is sort of like a shopping centre beacon of light in our outer, Western Sydney area. And from that, then other shopping centres developed in other areas. Come along to 1971. Gosh, 100 years of local government, and boy, did they celebrate. They celebrated like we have never celebrated ever again. They spent everything on creating a wonderful memory of our city, and the booklet that goes with it, written by local historians at the time, thousands of photographs that are now in the local archive at the library. And so they had sporting matches, they had street parades, they had a ball, they had an art competition. Everything that you could think of, they celebrated at these events in 1971. So modern Penrith is really reflected here in the construction of this walking bridge. It actually says a lot about the confidence from the state government in the local area. There's been lots of changes, lots of strategy about Penrith becoming like a regional city in the Sydney area. But the investment by the state government in this bridge, and we know for the future the investment for at the airport, and the changes that have been made with more people coming into the city. It's sad in some ways. By a lot of us who have lived here a reasonable amount of time would be thinking, we're kind of losing that country feel. We've always wanted to be a city, but we've always been more like a big country town. So this iconic construction kind of is the it sort of reflects what the future is going to be.